Hi folks, this is part, I think, 4. We finished the introduction and we're not going to talk about kids because we're going to do that at a later date, probably for part 5. But the early attempts of mind control was very successful. Problem is it was done out of necessity. Between the 1890s to I think 1904 or 1910, things were changing in society. Now, before, public schools was kind of a mishmash of religious schools, trade schools, and higher education schools. They had their problems and they had their doubts. Basically, it was a mishmash. So you couldn't control the population that good. During this time period, we had a great influx of Europeans coming in, the first wave. Now, the big problems were, if you watch the gangs in New York, um, the big problems were trying to combine all these different ethnic groups into one big mass and controlling them. Now, if they're in their own little ghettos, they have their own little wars, they all have their own public street fights. Ugh. They have their own public street fights, warfare, gang warfare, police, gangs, you name it. Unfortunately, if you don't take control, sooner or later you're going to have a strong man to control the problem. And you're going to have something like this in the future. I would recommend you read this book. And into fragmented states. But we're talking about early forms of mind control. This is about 5 minutes long, and we're at the 2-minute point. So if you feel tired or bored, or you don't get what Uncle Alan's saying, you leave. Okay? Easy as pie. Now, put that over here. Now, everybody gets confused when I'm talking about this. It's very simple. During this time period from 1890 to 1910, they were working out the kinks. Now, in Russia, where everybody remembers Pavlov's experiments, when you stimulate like sound, dog hears the bell, dog is hungry, dog gets food. Simple as that. So next time he hears that bell, he thinks he's going to get fed and he drools. And that's other experiments from Europe. And then overseas and other countries, they were doing the same thing. But the big drive for control, mind control, was the United States. It was part of the social reforms. They had schools set up by Henry Ford. Henry Ford had a big thing in it. Standard Oil was more for profit, and the Standard family had more for propaganda. So when these two forces combined, Edison, and he observed both factions and he studied them. Everybody was studying each other's. Reason why you could pick up neat things and it benefits your business. This was towards the end of the robber barons, and the robber barons knew social change was necessary. And Henry Ford wanted his workforce to be one easy mass that control online. His line was assembly line. Everybody spoke English. Everybody thought the same. Everybody didn't pee in their refrigerator or icebox back then. And everybody knows one each other. They played baseball together. They ate dinner together. They had churches together. They had organization together. But they were trained. They went to a certain school, American school, from these industrialists to train them how to think American and become American and wear American clothes and speak American, which was English, write American, get a bank loan as an American. And so this began working until you got about to 1926. Now, the early forms was for social reform and modernization. Before that was little independent groups fighting each other. Dead rabbit on a stick. History reference. I know Inspired John will get that, but, and I went over 5 minutes. Okay, this is important. Early forms after the 1920s, you have unions, you have everybody else getting into the pie. Some places were still doing robber baron stuff. Other places were trying to increase the social reform. But then it came all to a kind of kink right before the Great Depression. During the 20s, it was a mishmash. Some of it worked, some of it didn't work. And the prime offense of this during the 20s in America, and later went to Germany and Russia and all other places, but primarily came here in America. They want order. And at the time, the social reform was not racism, but for a developed society, a modern society, that what they really needed at that time was manufacturing. So they needed what workers? What they need is managers. And then you have higher class. So most of the schools were founded like this. One side of the school, because people were kind of slow and still are today, they had vocational school, and you learn your trades, and at the same time you learn English, and don't pee in the refrigerator. It's an old joke. A lot of people don't get it. They don't have the high IQ. They have vocational schools. They still have all the training, all the education as a regular school, but they learn a trade. Another section was the manager side. Manager was split into two groups. You have middle management, and that's 4-year degree, and you take care of the office stuff. And then you had the STEM guys. That's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. They went together. Out of these two groups, what happened was they had this weird section we called humanities, arts and humanities. Nobody really cared for it. It was a small offshoot branch, but this comes back to bite everybody in the ass years later. But anyway, they're looking for people to work the machines, the factories, the governments. And it worked great for a time until we reach World War II. And then all hell breaks loose because we have propaganda on one side and we have social reform on the other. And then after World War II, and that's it. Okay? And we'll discuss how they, using these factors, they change your kids from social reform or propaganda into the worst things in the world. And we're going to talk about that in our next video, part 5. Catch you later, folks.